We don't want to be under occupation again. We don't want to end up in the situation that someone will sit somewhere on the beach or on the shore of the Black Sea and decide which country will have Estonia. So this is not our way, and this is why we truly believe that these values, democracy and also the freedom to choose your own future, is something we have to defend and protect.
Minister Pevkur, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting.
Well, it's great to have you here at the Reagan Institute and here in Washington, D.C. Why don't you give our listeners and viewers a sense of what you've been up to here in Washington? Of course, you arrived, I believe, from Estonia with a lot to discuss with our leaders from the Trump administration over in the U.S. Congress.
Well, definitely, and considering that Estonia and the United States have very good relations, then it is important for me to be here as a minister, as a member of cabinet, and also not only to talk about the defense matters, but also about the two countries, about the relations we have, and having meetings with the administration, having meetings on the Hill, in Senate, in the House. So it is important for me to be here, and it's always good to be in Washington because I really like Washington.
Well, it's great to have you here. It's great to have allies here in town. Obviously, you're no stranger to Washington, D.C. You served as defense minister during the previous administration, although the environment, of course, is changed in Washington quite dramatically. No one would confuse the Biden administration with the Trump administration. But most importantly, I think for Estonia, and this is the conversation I was hoping to have with you today, is that the situation has really devolved from a security standpoint in your neck of the woods. And specifically, there's been a lot of coverage in the United States of what is going on around the Baltics, what is going around Finland, in terms of what Russia is up to. You did an interview with Fox News. The foreign minister had some coverage in the Wall Street Journal. There's just been a lot of discussion around what Russia is doing in your neighborhood. Would you kind of highlight some of the things that you've been emphasizing and seeing from your Russian neighbors?
Well, for that, I believe that we have to go back in history a bit, not maybe too far, and then not maybe to Reagan time, but still, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a hope in the world that we will see Russia as a democratic country. So for the first decade until the millennium, there was a hope that we will see a bit different Russia. After the change of power, and when President Putin came into power, we've seen constantly that Russia is turning again into this hostile, into this angry country who is testing and pushing its neighbors. Take just Chechnya, then the Georgian War in 2008, then 2014 invasion to Crimea. And then 2022, the full-scale war started in Ukraine. So they wanted to have this blitzkrieg. They wanted to have Kiev under their control in 3 days. They didn't manage that. So and actually they have not achieved any strategic goal at the moment in Ukraine. But still, we see that also during the war, these changes, what the Russian military is doing, the reform. They're ramping up the production in defense industry. They want to increase the troops to 1.5 million troops. They will increase their presence close to our neighborhood. So this is what they do. So they are hostile, and unfortunately, that means that affects also globally all of us here in the United States. In the Indo-Pac, we see that how Russia is tightening the relations with China, with North Korea, with Iran. So, and all that brings us to the understanding that when we are protecting the values of free world together in NATO, in the Western world, then we have to be together. We have to stick together, and we do not see, unfortunately, that Russia will change in the nearest future. Maybe somewhere in the future, but not now.
Under Vladimir Putin, in the language you use is hostile and is challenging, not just in words, but in action. And you referenced the force he's building of 1.5 million. I mean, effectively, this is a wartime economy. And not only is Vladimir Putin continuing the war of aggression in Ukraine, and certainly Estonia has been one of the countries in Europe, one of the NATO countries that has been very active in supporting Ukraine, but also Russia is making these investments in modernizing its military and increasing its presence along the border with Estonia and Finland. Talk about what you're doing in terms of the Baltic defense line and what that means and what are you responding to. And then I want to also address whether in any way Vladimir Putin can view as NATO as being provocative and he's responding in a defensive fashion. But talk about the defensive line.
Well, first of all, NATO was established as a defense organization, and it is a defense organization. So NATO has no wishes to invade to Russia. So just to clarify that and to be very frank and to be very, very blunt here. Secondly, when we look into the history, and you mentioned that that we've come through the history, and when you take the also before going to the Baltic defense line, which is very important, but just to have the context.
Sure.
107 years ago, we started our independence war against Russia, or we didn't start, but we had to defend ourselves because Russia invaded Estonia. So we defended our country, and we started that war with 2,000 troops, not many. We ended this war by winning that war with 50,000 troops, and concluding also the Tartu Peace Treaty. And unfortunately, again, we saw that Russia is not accepting this, and then they started the Second World War. We lost again our independence, and when you take also this time, what that means. One thing is to have the independence, and we all understand what to have the freedom and what we are standing for at the moment globally. But the other thing is economically. And just to give you an example, that in late 30s, the Estonian GDP per capita was a bit higher than the Finnish GDP per capita. During the occupation, in 50 years, we lost 17 times. So after 91, after independence, our GDP per capita was 17 times lower than the Finnish. So today it's about 2 times. So today we're at the level on the level of Spain, Portugal, that kind of countries.
So you've recovered,
but we recovered. But just to understand that what that means to be under the Soviet occupation, or what that means to be under the dictatorship. So all these measures we are doing now, going to 5%, 5.4% with from GDP with the defense spendings, building the defense line, increasing our defense capabilities, acquiring a lot of new capabilities, also HIMARS from the United States. So we are doing that to preserve our peace, our freedom to decide ourselves. So it's not about that what Russia is doing. So coming to the defense line. It's very simple. This is one of the measures what we can do during the peacetime to save us time in the case of crisis. That means that we will build the bunkers, we will build the anti-tank trenches, we will pre-position dragon teeth, so there's the concrete dragon teeth, barbed wires, and many things we can do during the peacetime to secure our own freedom and to secure the territory, because we see from Ukraine, you cannot give an inch to Russians, because then it will be very difficult to get it back.
And this is the salient, I think, lesson from Ukraine as it relates to the Baltics and to the former Soviet bloc countries that are now free, that Ukraine is teaching, which is you have to prepare for a possibility of invasion. And you need to deny, as best you can, through investments right now, the possibility that what Vladimir Putin has done in Ukraine, right, he could do in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or elsewhere, and Poland should be included in that as well. Which, from a political standpoint, it seems to be, regardless of what will happen in Ukraine, we can talk about the prospects of a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky in Turkey. No one's really betting on Vladimir Putin becoming peaceful. Nobody is betting on a peaceful Europe as long as Vladimir Putin sits at the helm in Moscow. I mean, that's the political takeaway of this environment right now.
Well, A couple of things. First, when we think about that war, which is ongoing in Ukraine, there are a couple of very important things. First, this matters also to U.S. And this matters globally because every dictator in the world is looking very closely at the moment how the free world is handling this war, and what will be our message to Xi, to Kim, to Iran, to many others, that who have the ultimate power and at their own country or in their own country. So this is the first. Secondly, I would say that how it or why it matters to the United States, as we're sitting here at the Reagan Center. So I just remembered the book, amazing book wrote by Matthew Crank, and the headline is "We Win, They Lose."
Right.
So and there's the famous saying of Ronald
You got
Reagan.
that for someplace, exactly.
Well, it's like a couple of years before he became a president.
That's
so
right.
and he was asked that what should be the U.S. policy towards Soviet Union, and he said it's simple: we win, they lose. So. And at the moment, we are seeing that Russia is actually doing something that they would also like to impact the U.S. policy, U.S. global policy as a democracy watchdog, and this is why it matters for U.S. citizens, each of them living here in the United States. It matters for the U.S. administration.
Well, we certainly agree with you, and that sentiment here at the Reagan Institute, and I think Americans overall do. And we conduct actually twice a year, survey on the views of the American people with respect to foreign policy, national security, and defense issues. And consistently, the American people are clear-eyed about Russia today and Putin's Russia. And they view it overwhelmingly as an adversary. And Americans are consistently concerned about freedom and want to see freedom grow and spread in the world and not retract. But, and there's a big but here, which of course you're aware of, and you've just come from Capitol Hill and talking to the administration, is that in terms of the U.S. investment in the war in Ukraine, right? The United States has been very generous. President Trump ran on a platform that said, hey, we're not going to continue giving our dollars to Ukraine. Mineral deals been established, signed, that will show some economic integration and perhaps interest in the part of the United States on that level to work with the Ukrainians. But the value perhaps is there and shared by Americans, but the investment, really the view is that the Europeans should do more. Now, Estonia and your government has done that. Europe is doing it. But I think the view is certainly from this administration is that it needs to do more, and it will be this sort of coalition of the willing. Tell me how that is sounding in the halls of your capital and other capitals across NATO and Western Europe.
Well, I believe that we have to split two things. First is the NATO. What we do inside of NATO to secure NATO's stability and to secure the NATO's freedom and peace in NATO countries. And the other thing is what we see at the moment in Ukraine and how we step up helping Ukraine. The facts are that Europe collectively has given more military assistance to Ukraine as United States. So this is just by fact. I understand that you can have different views on that, and there are many things you cannot see when we talk about the intelligence sharing and all that. But when we take purely military assistance, howitzers, ammunition, all that, drones. So then the European assistance has been bigger than the U.S., but more or less it's very close to each other. So, but again, this is not the race who is doing more. It's about the race who can help Ukraine to win this war. So, but nevertheless, coming now to a question. So, I believe that what is important to understand is that we are ready to help Ukraine more, and we need to offer the security guarantees for the Ukraine peace. So coalition of the willing is one of the options for that. And then this is why also Estonia stepped up and said very clearly that yes, we are ready for this, but also we need to have United States on board because it's our common responsibility. And I will put it very simple. When you have the option to have 800,000 troops army on our side or added to 800,000 troops of Russian army? Which way do we choose? My answer is very simple. I would like to have Ukrainians on our side. I would like to have, if necessary, Ukrainians fighting for the NATO's freedom and not to be on the other side of the line.
Yeah, I mean, no question. I think from a security standpoint, both for a free Europe, but also for the United States, a Ukraine that's occupied by Russia would be a tragedy of freedom, and also would be a major security challenge to NATO. And at the same time, there's a view, and the position of NATO is they will delay. And one of the discussions around some sort of negotiation is that Ukraine may not ever become a member of NATO. And in other words, whatever is being discussed in some sort of deal, that may be an element of the deal where Ukraine would have to agree to not become a member of NATO for at least a foreseeable future. But again, you could have that outcome at the same time, not have Russia occupying Kyiv, which of course is the most important objective. Your government has been pretty forward and vocal that you believe that Ukraine should be a member of NATO.
Yes, we are, and we still believe that this is the best security guarantee for Ukraine. But again, when we talk about the history and when we talk about the timelines, yes, we understand that in the foreseeable future or in the upcoming years, it is not possible for Ukraine to be a member of NATO. But it was the same when Estonia got back its independence in 91, that nobody believed that we will be very quickly member of NATO. But it took for us 14 years to be a member of NATO. And now coming to the history point of view, well, for me, it is not possible to accept that you will choose one time in the history and say that this is the right moment. What Putin is doing at the moment, and the Crimea is Russian, and
Sure.
and Ukraine is part of original Russia, etc. But let's go into the history. So the Mongols conquered Russia for 300 years, being also very close to Moscow. Ukrainians have an amazing T-shirt, what they spread, which has the saying "Make Russia small again." So and it describes the time from 15th century when Russian, like the main territory of Russia was basically the Moscow Oblast, very small territory surrounded or in the neighborhood of Moscow. So this is why you cannot say, or when you take the Polish-Lithuanian country or the state, then this was close to Moscow. When you take also the any other wars in the history, Russia has not been that size what they have today. So and this is why yes, we are very vocal in that. Yes, we truly believe that it is better to have Ukrainians with us than without us, and this is the reason why we believe that membership in European Union and membership in NATO is the best future for Ukraine.
Yet there are views here in Washington. I'm sure you've heard them already, not just inside the Trump administration, but also on Capitol Hill, that takes the perspective, and I would love your reaction to this, which is, listen, Estonia, the Baltics, you really should focus on your own defense and focus on preventing any sort of opportunity for Russia to exploit. But if you go ahead and you invest and you focus too much on Ukraine, you're going to make yourself vulnerable. In other words, you're inviting the very outcome you're seeking to avoid. Tell me your reaction to that. It would seem to be a false choice, and would be playing into almost Russian talking points. But this idea that the Baltics and the NATO countries really should just focus on their own borders, and particularly if you're a smaller country like Estonia and the Baltic states, you shouldn't be going too deep and investing too much and creating too much noise around the plight of Ukraine.
Well, let me ask, is 0.25% of your GDP too much? This is what we said. Of course, we've done more, to be correct with the facts. But 0.25% annually to help Ukraine to defend its own people and countries. I believe that this is not much because 99.75% of your GDP will stay in your own country. Right. That's first thing. The second thing, and it's not about sending assistance, military assistance to Ukraine only. We are talking about and why we're so vocal. We're talking about the values. We're talking about the principles, and this is important. We don't want to be under occupation again. We don't want to end up in the situation that someone will sit somewhere on the beach or on the shore of the Black Sea and decide which country will have Estonia. So this is not our way, and this is why we truly believe that these values, democracy and also the freedom to choose your own future, is something we have to defend and protect. And this is why I believe it is also important for American people to believe and to protect these values, because the Constitution of the United States says very clearly that the United States is a democratic country.
No doubt. I mean, is it the democratic republic, the values of freedom, of course, are enshrined in our Constitution and have led on it. And, of course, here we are at the Reagan Institute. I think President Reagan's one of his most important contributions during his presidency in recognizing that after the Second World War, and given what played out during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, our safety, that is the safety of the American people, relied upon the U.S. being that beacon of light, beacon of freedom across the world, because if we didn't stand with free people around the world, it would threaten our freedom at home. Of course, he worked hard to counter the streak of isolationism that has always been in the United States. Of course, in Reagan's day, it was quite clear that the lessons of World War II was one we should never return to the isolationist mindset. Let me ask you another question, though, because there's a qualitative difference, of course, between Ukraine and Estonia. Estonia is in NATO. You are a treaty partner. Estonia is an ally of the United States. Sounds to me, the undercurrent in this conversation is that there is some concern that Article 5 today, that is this notion that all NATO allies will come to the defense of a NATO ally who's attacked, is somehow weaker than it has been in the past. Some, perhaps in NATO, are concerned that it doesn't mean as much as perhaps you thought it meant decades ago. Am I getting that right, or is there no is Article 5 as strong as perhaps we've interpreted and thought of it previously?
Well, I am a true believer of NATO and also the people of countries belonging to NATO, and also when I take the United States, so. Again, when we go back to the Second World War, when Estonia was occupied again, then there was a person in the State Department called Sumner Welles.
Yes.
And the Sumner Welles Declaration, and basically, this showed also to us the light at the end of the tunnel, that there is a hope. And actually, Sumner Welles Declaration is still valid, yes, by the way. So, but anyway, so the point is that that when we talk about Article 5, then for me, there is no question that one for all for one principle is still valid. But the point is that in NATO treaty there is also Article 3. And this Article 3 says that you have to do everything you can in order to defend your own country. And this is exactly what we are doing. This is exactly why we are putting more than 5% of our own GDP to defend our country.
And I would know, it's a great point, Minister. Yes, there's Article 5, but as we've heard a lot in the political conversation here, the United States is more inclined and will be a better NATO ally if the free rider problem is addressed. And Estonia is a shining example of a country that is not relying on someone else to provide for their security, but is at over 5% GDP invested in their defense. And I'd note the United States, including the defense budget that was submitted by President Trump's Office of Management and Budget, will fall below 3% GDP and will be the lowest number in terms of as a percentage of GDP invested in national defense since the end of the Cold War during the Clinton administration. So there's no doubt your point about Article 3 is sound, and it says a lot about Estonia's commitment to its own defense and making it a shining example of what a NATO ally should be. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what you're doing. It's pretty striking that 4 countries have withdrawn from the Ottawa Convention.
Yeah, this is
It's a striking example.
But again, you mentioned the Baltic defense line. Yeah. So and when we talk about the capabilities, so we will put billions to ammunition. We will put billions to new capabilities. So this, as a small country, we see that we need to do. Is it easy for us?
No. Right.
No. Is it because we had to increase the taxes? We had to cut the budget in many other sectors to get this 5.4%.
But it's gotten support. I mean, is this making the government?
Yeah, but again, when we compare to that you are paying today, or Estonia is paying 5.4% into its own defense, then Ukraine is paying to defend the country around 20% of the GDP. So I would say that it's a relatively small price to pay 5% during the peacetime instead of paying 20% during the wartime. So and now coming to the Ottawa Convention, this is also just one example where we say that during the peacetime, we had to make this decision to be ready to defend our countries and to use all the means.
For our listeners and viewers, sorry to interrupt, but the Ottawa Convention, for those who are less familiar, this is a convention which was
anti-personnel landmines.
Correct. So you were the countries Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland were part of this convention.
Also Finland now.
And Finland.
So it's 5 countries.
And the geography of these countries is pretty relevant. All of them have pretty exposed borders to Russia. But the point of it is you're taking steps to prevent, or actually to respond, to thwart, to arrest, is probably the best way to frame it, a Russian invasion of your country. It will allow Estonia and the other countries to place mines to prevent the sort of invasion that the world saw in February 2022 when Vladimir Putin's Russia invaded Ukraine. And that's what this mine warfare would allow. It's a denial strategy. Do I have that right?
Well, again, I've spoken so many times about the history, but as we have the saying that when you don't remember the history, you don't have the future. So when we talk about the landmines, when we talk about all these changes we've made regarding the spending, regarding the investments, regarding the decisions about the Ottawa or the defense line. So we have these scars of the history, which when we take the Ukrainian war, we see that Ukrainian war has the same elements what Russians did or the Soviets did to us during the Second World War, deporting children and families to Siberia. You cannot find in Estonia any family who has no ties to deportation of people to Siberia. It's the same in Ukraine. So you see that the families are basically taken by force to Russia, and the children are taken by force to Russia. So we do not want to see that again ever in Estonia, anywhere in Europe.
You invite history to repeat itself if you don't take those actions. That's a sound point, and particularly the playbook, the terrific playbook, plays on the traumas of Estonians. Minister, you're also a political player. Obviously, you got deep policy expertise.
Well, not much. So I have been in politics only for about 20 years. So.
There we go. We'll call that qualified.
Yeah.
And is there a view? Is there an element in the Estonian population that would say, "Hey, what this minister is talking about is warmongering. He's somebody who's just, trying to invent a conflict that is not there." Give us a sense of what the people, the voters in Estonia say. I mean, I imagine this is as close as you can get to consensus in a democracy.
Well, we have to be realistic and to show to our population. And this, by the way, Estonia was just announced in the press Freedom Press Index on position 2, so after Norway, I believe.
So one of those three countries according to Freedom House.
Freedom House, but all the indexes you can find, you will find us in top 10 at least. And when you take, this, that you have to be open to your public, you have to say how it is, then the people can make the decisions. And we are measuring that. We are asking from the people, not we, but the agencies are asking, and 80% of Estonians are saying that if there is a need to defend the country, we support that. 70% of the population is saying that if there is a need to defend the country with a weapon, we are ready to contribute. So this is the answer to your question that, the population understands.
Numbers, yes.
These are very strong numbers because in every society you have people who are ready to flee the country in case of crisis.
Hear those numbers. They are extremely strong in any democracy. Only totalitarian states have better numbers, where they get 99% of the vote.
Yeah, but we
but in democracy,
again,
better.
nobody. Just go to the streets of Estonia. You will not find a person who will say, "Oh, we are, we would like to be again under the occupation." So
no, of course. But I am curious about the population in Estonia. It gets a lot of attention that are dual citizens. That is to say that Russian and Estonian citizens and Estonians with family in Russia. That's a layer of complexity in policy, and it also challenges, right? It rubs against security and freedom, and every democracy has to manage that. That tends to get pointed out. I'm curious for you to contextualize, give some perspective on that as well.
Well, in every society we have different nations. United States, a great example of the multiplicity and the variety of nationalities.
Yes.
When you take the number of Russians living in Germany, this is much higher than the number of Russians living in Estonia. I will just give you a couple of facts.
Yeah, but
First,
the Kremlin seeks to exploit the Russian citizens in Estonia. Maybe perhaps more than Germany is my assumption.
Your assumption is wrong, I would say.
Okay.
Why? And I would explain that. So the Russian propaganda is using its own people living abroad to come to the streets and to say that Putin is doing the right things. So you've had in Germany, for instance, in Berlin, many demonstrations supporting Putin and the war in Ukraine. You have not seen in Estonia during these 3 years any demonstration where people are coming out and saying that they are supporting the war in Ukraine. Are there people who are thinking this way? Of course, everywhere. You have these in the United States. Sure. But again, we do not have any demonstrations, or we have not had any demonstrations. And when you ask from these people, do you want to live in Estonia or you want to go to Russia? They all will answer they want to live in Estonia because they see what is the situation just across the border. So this is the answer to you that they all want to live in Estonia. Although
free people tend not to want to give up their freedom.
Obviously, and in this sense, in every country we have foreigners. This is not a question. The question is how you treat them, and I'm saying with very confident that we are not putting any restrictions. Each of those people living in Estonia, by the way, 50,000 Ukrainians, have the same rights as any other to apply for the Estonian citizenship, which conditions are, by the way, very similar to the United States. You have to know the language, you have to be living in Estonia at least 5 years, and you have to give the exam knowing the Constitution. That's
civics.
it. That's it.
One more set of questions, then we'll go into our lightning round. We'll test your knowledge of President Reagan, which, in our conversation, I know you'll impress. But, of course, the focus right now is what will happen in Turkey. As we record this podcast, we anticipate President Zelensky will be in Turkey. Unclear whether Putin will show up, and there's this possibility that President Trump might be there too if Putin does. Chances, likelihood of the three of them being there in Turkey this week, and what do you think that might mean if it does happen?
Well, first, I believe that Putin will not show up. And also I just heard before coming here that from U.S. part, Secretary Rubio will go there. So that already gives the hint that Putin will not show up. Zelensky is there. Zelensky has always said that he is ready for unconditional ceasefire. So this is totally different story, and Putin has never said that. Putin has always said that there are preconditions, but you cannot have the peace talks with preconditions. That means that you are going behind the table with already some preconditions. So to have the ceasefire in place, the only option is that from day one, we will have the ceasefire, and then both parties will sit around the table or behind the table and negotiate about the prisoners of war, about the children who have been abducted, about the territories, about the future arrangement of the control line, because it will never be a border. I can say
It's going to be a DMZ sort of at best.
something like that. So, but nevertheless, that you cannot put any preconditions, and we see that when Putin is not showing up, then we clearly understand that, and that's another proof that they are not interested in peace.
Last question, and then we'll go to the lightning round. I think you're right. I would be surprised if Vladimir Putin shows up. And I think what we'll get is what happens when you let Putin be Putin, which is you won't get a peace agreement. But the administration and different voices have said this. Most recently, I believe it was Vice President Vance, I'm talking about the U.S. administration, is that if they are unable to get some sort of agreement, if a ceasefire, and are unable to make progress on a ceasefire, then the United States will focus its attention elsewhere. What does that mean to you? What do you hope that means? So Putin doesn't come up to Turkey. It's clear that he just wants to continue fighting. When the United States focuses attention elsewhere, what do you understand that to mean?
Well, we don't have the explanation to that, and I really do hope that actually, United States will step up actually after that, because then it's a clear proof that Putin doesn't want to have the peace, and then the only option, as I see it, is to feed the Ukrainian army, to arm them to teeth, and to give the option to put Putin on and then Putin's army onto the knees, and that they are forced to come to negotiate. If that's not happening, so then of course Ukraine will be fighting for its freedom and for its people, and this is the only thing to expect, because I cannot see that President Zelensky will go to say to its people that okay, let's negotiate, and I have always said that bad peace for Ukraine is a bad peace for United States. It's a bad peace for Europe.
Let's go to the lightning round. We're with the Estonia Defense Minister, Pevkur. Great to have you here. Now we test your Reagan knowledge, or at least preferences. Here's where we ask our guests to share their favorite Reagan speech or quote or book. What do you have? Anything that you like or want to share that you remember about President Reagan?
Well, I already actually mentioned that during the interview that when we talk about Reagan's positions, Reagan's sayings, then one of my favorites still is that we win, they lose. So yes. when he described the policy of the United States toward the Soviet Union, and I believe that brings together in a very short context and content what it should be, and then how it should be dealt, and the same, that peace through strength and all these, And this is why I just a couple of months ago finished the book of Matthew Groening, We Win, They Lose. So it's a good book, but when we talk about the speeches, then of course for us from the history point of view, again we spoke so many times about the history. The speech by Brandenburger Tor, so the gates of Brandenburg on June 12th, 1987, because this had a meaning for Estonia. That basically laid the basis also for our independent movement, and this was a great speech, and I really suggest everyone to read that.
Tear down this wall. It was a message to Mr. Gorbachev, but it was a message that inspired clearly generations of those in Europe and now living in freedom.
It was more than a message, and definitely, it was definitely more than a message. But when we talk about Reagan, one of the things I really would like to bring up is his sense of humor. And you have so many different stories what he told to his audience, and I believe that this is something when a young politician comes to the politics and to understand how to held a speech, then just take Reagan speeches, and how elegantly, I just remembered one of the stories about the Soviet Union,
right.
And that how elegantly he squeezed the screw for the Soviet Union. You know, the story about the.
You love the jokes about the Soviet Union. It was subversive. Yeah,
I will bring up, you know,
Okay.
one from the memory, you know, about the buying the car. So you know that. So but you know that, you know, when that how it is to buy the car in the Soviet Union, and then there is a queue, you know, to wait for the car for 10 years, and then there was a guy who collected the money and went to the store and said that I have the money, so can I have the cars? And then the buyer says that, or the seller says that, yes, please, then come in 10 years and you will get the car. So, and then the guys asked, is it in the morning time or afternoon? What's the difference? Because, you know, it's in 10 years. Yes, but I have a plumber coming in the morning. So, so just, you know, but this is an elegant way to show to the...
And it drove the Soviet leadership crazy, and it really was part of the strategy. Mr. Minister, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to give you a special gift. It's something I want you to remember, and all listeners and viewers and Americans. This is one of President Reagan's favorite lines. It can be done. He kept it on his desk, and I hope you'll keep it on your desk too.
Well, thank you very much. And, you know, when you take the Adidas, German company, but, you know, they have that impossible and nothing. So it's
Adidas too. So, for this one.
Anyway, so you have.
Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.